I think most of you all know me as one of McGeorge's representatives in the society. I'm the editor. My colleague who will be moderating the first panel, Steve Mccaffrey, is our director in the society. Here, however, my role is as director of our Global Center for Business and Development, which is putting on the conference component of the Society's annual meeting. And I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for your attendance and for your participation. As I said, the conference today is one that is highly participatory. First, let me open with asking our Dean, Elizabeth Rindskopf Parker, to make some welcome remarks. But let me introduce Elizabeth not just as our Dean in background, but really as an instrumental force in our international programs generally, and indeed in our participation in the society in particular, because while we've been a long time participant in the society, it was Elizabeth with me, for example, who said, we will attend every society meeting, we will be active participants, we will host an annual meeting. And so Elizabeth has been a force for our international program, and so I'll turn to Elizabeth to have some welcome remarks.
Well, thank you, Frank. Now, if you believe that, you believe in the tooth fairy, because everybody knows that all a dean can do is suggest and pray. So it's really the faculty. Well, good morning and welcome. And as Frank said, I am Elizabeth Rindskopf Parker, and of course I'm the dean of McGeorge, and as all deans like to do, I want to welcome you to our campus, something I like to think of as our secret garden. Frank has had the brilliant idea, I think, of hosting you at lunch at the garden, so we'll hope that the weather cooperates. This is an extremely important conference for us to host, and I wanted just to say a word about that. Frank has alluded to the fact that it was, of course, my hope that one day this would happen, and it's particularly pleasant that it's happening as I conclude my 10 years as dean. And by the way, since I am concluding as dean, I'm now indulging myself, and I hope you will as well, with stories and reminiscences. So just for a few minutes here, be patient with me. I suspect that some of you are wondering why a school like McGeorge, relatively small in size, located in a city that I think we would have to confess is not an international destination city, is so committed to international and comparative law and to globalizing the curriculum. And I thought you might enjoy a story or two by way of explanation. I think, frankly, there's some institutional history here that's very important, not just for us, but for other schools as well. Sometimes deans say to me, well, how is it that you have been successful in getting probably well over half of your faculty to be so committed and invested in an international focus, transnational, comparative, and global? And so I think the story really goes back to the mid-'80s. Now, it is also true that in the mid-'80s, our wonderful Steve Mccaffrey, who was here, but I can't see now. Oh, there he is. That's my info. With Don Berger, accepted the invitation of Berkeley's John Fleming to join the society. And so we have John Fleming and Steve and Don to thank for our initial introduction. But the depth with which I think our faculty has embraced the topics you'll be talking about over the next couple of days, I think flows from a different set of experiences. And they really do, interestingly, tie to one of our founders, Justice Anthony Kennedy. You may not know that were we to count adjuncts and part-time faculty, he's probably our senior faculty member. He's taught at this law school for all but one of the last 40-odd years. And I would say that because much of that time was spent in Salzburg, Justice Kennedy experienced something of a conversion experience in being in Salzburg and teaching a comparative topic. I think over time, his attitudes and views changed, and that's one of the reasons why he is one on the Supreme Court who people frequently say first embraced international law as an important part of the body of law that we all work to preserve, interpret, and advance. But similarly, Justice Kennedy did something for the law school which is very important. We may have helped him broaden his perspective by those trips to Salisbury, but when you have a Supreme Court justice in your summer program, it becomes quite robust. And of course, deans care about budget. And that means then that we had the budget to take virtually every one of our faculty at one point or another. There may be one or two who've still not accepted the offer, and allowed them to teach in Salisbury. And so they, one by one, were converted as well. And that then gave me, when I arrived in 2002, what we say, a pre-prepared playing field, if you will. They were eager to do things in the comparative international transnational realm, and so it was really Frank's idea that suggested that we might gather together and produce the teaching materials that you now know as Globalizing the Curriculum series. Is it 22 books at this point? That would allow not just us, but any faculty in the country to begin to globalize their curriculum materials. And I think that effort was an extremely valuable and important one, and really in the nature of a contribution, so that faculty around the country, even though they might not feel immediately comfortable with comparative international and transnational topics, could, through these volumes, introduce at least some part of that into their teaching, and hopefully gradually then encouraging their scholarship as well. Now I'm going to interrupt my flow here for just a minute and say we did not do this by ourselves, and so I would have to acknowledge Matthias Ryman, who really has been a fellow traveler for much of this time. His first course, and my first experience with him, was the transnational course that he created at Michigan, and that was an idea that stimulated us, and Matthias has been wonderfully supportive. And then we have Louisville Duka, who's here, I know, I saw him moments ago, and I'd have to say that we have thanks to you too, Louis, because you, I think, when you came and reviewed our program, gave us the courage to see ourselves as deeply committed, as indeed we are. That outside perspective was extremely valuable, and so you too, I want to call out and give special thanks to. Well, that gives you an understanding, I think, of why in my concluding year as dean this is so meaningful to me, because this indeed has been a focus that I have had with my faculty over the last decade, and I think it's been so wonderfully productive and valuable to us, and I think to others as well. Transformative, you might say. But now to the question of, well, so you're in Sacramento. How does this fit? Explain that to me, please, Elizabeth. And I've given that a lot of thought. You know, should a school in Sacramento so enthusiastically and passionately embrace the theme of international, comparative, and transnational law? I mean, is this kind of taking us off on a siding and not doing what any regional or national law school should do, and that is to pay attention to your home base? And here's the answer that I have gradually come upon. If you were to ask the question, what is our major export in the United States, you'd have to say that one of the top three is agricultural products. Well, those agricultural products principally come from California. And indeed, we are not just the capital here in Sacramento of the largest state in the Union, but also the capital of that food production powerhouse. And so in California, the largest export is indeed agricultural products. And here we are in Sacramento, so why wouldn't we be much more intentional about the importance of issues like food security, this important export that really does bring us into contact with the world in ways that I don't think we yet actually realize. But there's a second answer, and to me this is extremely powerful for us. I was reminded of it last night. We have something in the local bench and bar called the Unity Bar, and it brings together all the different specialty bars. In Sacramento, we may be the most diverse and well-integrated community in the country. We've been so ranked by a Harvard study, of which I can only say I saw it in Time magazine, so pardon my scholarly investigation. But the point is that this is a community with 80,000 Ukrainians, 25,000 Pakistani Americans, a large Hispanic population. It goes on. And so the world is coming to us, and there's every reason why in that kind of a setting locally and globally, we need to be passionately involved and aware of comparative law issues in particular. And just to give you one small example, I was struck recently talking with one of our district attorneys who said, you know, the fact that you bring these Ukrainian students here every year is very important. These are LLM students for us. She said, there ought to be a way that we could work with them and the Ukrainian community where there's tremendous fear about law enforcement as it is perceived, received, and implemented in the United States. And she said, I worry that in many of our immigrant communities, we have pockets of, how shall I say, a void of cooperation with the police that then creates the ability for these individuals to be played upon and victimized. And so here we are in kind of ground zero of the importance of comparative law, comparative traditions, comparative culture. And so, yes, Sacramento is exactly the place for a school like ours that has truly embraced international, comparative, and transnational topics. Whether we think about these as high theoretical topics, teaching topics, or actually ways in which to influence the world in which our students will be moving. And so, yes, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you, and I want to thank the society, and I want to thank, John Rice for bringing you all here, and I do hope that this will be as wonderful a day and a half for you as I know it will be for us. We offer you food for thought, food for the soul, and yes, food for the body. Thanks to Frank and our wonderful staff. So welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll keep my introduction very brief so we can keep more or less on time. We're going to be dealing with two subjects. We're going to be rotating throughout the conference today and then tomorrow morning, talking about teaching, revolution, constitution, teaching, revolution, and constitution, teaching. And I do want to thank Rolf and Richard, who organized the hot topic panels and the uncomparativist panels, for actually coordinating that. I think it turned out by happenstance, because I know the uncomparativist panel was a sort of call for papers and a competition, because it created a nice theme. And I think there's a nice theme between teaching, constitution, and revolution. Because when you think about teaching, what you're actually doing is planting at least the intellectual seeds for intellectual, if not physical, revolution and constitution. And as we think about teaching, and I want to turn to that part of our conference, comparative law, we're asking, what is the constitution of our society, in the sense that what is this all about? What is the utility of comparative law? What is the core of it? What do we expect out of our students? Because in some sense, that's what we expect out of ourselves. As Elizabeth mentioned, most of us on the faculty here, and I suspect that's widespread, we did take a survey, and we'll talk about those results from time to time, came at comparative law in a very narrow spectrum. I come at it from comparative corporate law. And a variety of my colleagues have come at it in terms of comparative tort law or comparative property law or so on. But what is the overall core of the field? What brings it all together and makes it a subject that we think is worth passing on to a next generation? That's really the subject when we talk about teaching comparative law that we're going to be addressing. What is the well-educated student of comparative law to take away? Is it methodology? Is it a philosophy? Is it an approach which pervades the way we look at law in the world? Is it simply a way of better understanding specific narrow areas? Is it a way of looking at culture? Those are the subjects we're going to be addressing today. To help us in that endeavor, I've drafted three of my colleagues who are quite skilled in interactive approaches, this being a large classroom. And the first of my colleagues who's going to be moderating the panel on the core course is Steve Mccaffrey, who's our first contact with this organization. Steve is a public international person in many regards, former member of the United Nations Law Revision Commission, former legal advisor for the State Department, but Steve is also a comparativist from years and years. He doesn't look that way, though. There's got to be a painting someplace that ages while he doesn't. But Steve, I turn